Well, I figured I should bring back question of the day one more time before the season starts. I want to talk some disagreements. What do you guys disagree with me on? So that's what we're going to be doing today. I asked in a community tab, what are some of the things that you disagree with me on? And I was going to use it for a video. Well, this is that video. Let's just get into what you disagree with me on out of any of the takes I've had this offseason. Your take on Jacksonville's pass rush is definitely disagreeable by only giving them 0 rating on your recent defense rankings video. If you watched their preseason games, the starting D-line had multiple pressures and a few sacks. Note, the starting line contains Trayvon Walker, Josh Allen, Arden Key, and Dawon Smoot. To put it shortly, you did them dirty, in my opinion. You know, one thing I think that's always just difficult with these rankings in general is you have to keep in mind every team has talented pass rushers and every team has talented receivers. I think sometimes people look at their defensive line and say, well, look at all these guys. But the issue is every team has good players. You know, the defenses that I have that are just on that cutoff of where you get points for having a defensive a pass rush situation, it's like the Kansas City Chiefs were the 21st team, and that's the last one that gets points there. And that, you know, it was the Bengals who were one spot ahead, and those teams have, you know, like Chris Jones and George Karlaftis, for the Chiefs. Like, those are two really good pass rushers. I expect Karlaftis to be good right away, and so, you know, you have to overcome that. And that's when it starts to become a little bit more like, okay, I can kind of see how you could argue one way or the other. Again, part of this is coming down to I'm just not a Trayvon Walker believer. Maybe I'll be wrong about that. But really it comes down to if I believe Walker is going to take some time to develop, it really is, to me, Josh Allen having to carry a lot of the load there. You are right, though, that Dawon Smoot and Arden Key are both guys who can pass rush well from the interior, but, you know, I think edge rusher tends to be the most important thing. But I can see the logic behind it. If Walker does come in and play really well right away, they're probably going to be much better pass rush than I had currently predicted them to be. My Bears as a whole are being underestimated. Many think the freaking Lions are better than us. I just want the season to start and the narratives to be incinerated. Well, listen, maybe so. All we can do is focus on what we see now. You can always talk yourself into every single team, and I do think that the Bears, like every team, if things go perfectly, could be much better than we expected. But again, you kind of have to view this compared to some other teams. So yeah, I've been very low on the Bears, but you know, we'll see. Yes, I do have the Lions ahead of the Bears, but who knows? It's always possible that I'm wrong about this stuff. Josh Allen. This is the take I kind of expected to be brought up. I thought this was a really interesting way to phrase it, and actually I think I'd agree with this counter to my take, which is I'm not saying he's the best quarterback in football, but to quote you twice, on his best day, Josh Allen is the best quarterback in football, and you need a little bit of luck to win a Super Bowl. So if you're a little bit lucky and get a few straight playoff games in which Josh Allen is on, you have very good odds to win the Super Bowl, which is the ultimate goal. I completely agree with that, and I think you could even make the argument that you might prefer Josh Allen to someone like, a Joe Burrow, who I did have higher in my rankings, but maybe you could say, well, I'll take the guy with the higher ceiling because in those important games, you might need someone with that high of a ceiling, although Joe Burrow just almost won a Super Bowl recently, so you don't need that necessarily, and Joe Burrow also has a very high ceiling, I think, but I can certainly see the logic behind, let me take someone who has the higher ceiling and still a pretty high floor. Like, Josh Allen is still very good. Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with it, and I think the Bills could win a Super Bowl. I think that they are a Super Bowl contender, largely because of Josh Allen, even if he, might have the occasional misstep. You're absolutely right. I think that's well said. There are a ton. Okay, well, you didn't have to say that, but my main issue over the last season has been your algorithm you developed. Not the math itself, but the reliance on tiers, which I think doesn't work, and more importantly, the reliance on your opinion where the position groups rank. An algorithm based on an opinion just doesn't work and isn't really worth anything. To some degree, I agree. This algorithm is not an end-all, be-all. It's just supposed to make it more of a accurate guess as to where the stuff will be. I can kind of look at where each position group ranks, and because of that, say, okay, this is how I think this team will play. But it's never been a perfect end-all, be-all, and I even made changes in my algorithm when I made my main video where I finally did my predictions, where I had, the Ravens did not do too well in the algorithm, but I still put them higher because I think that it doesn't really work for a team like the Ravens, who are very different. You're right, there are some issues, but, at the same time, I just think that there's no way to get a perfect preview, and I think it's more of a fun way to do it, for one thing, and I think it does make it more accurate. I don't think it's perfectly accurate, because you're never going to get a perfectly accurate predictions model, because you're right, it is just opinions. But if you want more of a less opinion-based thing, I do in the regular season a power rankings show where I do it not based on opinions, but based on PFF grades, which some would argue are still opinions. I wouldn't, but some would. So that kind of gives you more of an accurate representation of where it is. But I do get the argument behind it, and I get that it's not for everybody. To me, it's just a simpler way to give my predictions, but there are some flaws with it, absolutely. I think you were underestimating the Bears and Matt Eberflus. Having them as the worst defense in football is looking way too much on paper. Well, listen, that's what my evaluation is looking on paper. I have a specific extra thing where I give value to the coaching staff. So to me, I disagree with this, because I think that football is a game that is played with talent, not played with, I think that the scheme can get overrated a little bit. Don't get me wrong, a coach can lose you games with bad scheme, but I don't know if a coach can win you games with a good scheme. I think that if your talent isn't there, it doesn't matter how smart of, people you have working with this stuff, it is a talent-based game at the end of the day, and if you don't have the talent, I don't think you'll be successful. I think Eberflus is moving in the right direction. I do trust in him, but I just don't love the talent of that team. I just don't. I think Buffalo's wide receiving group is actually pretty good. To me, this kind of goes back to the sort of thing I talked about with pass rushers, where there's guys to like on this receiving core team. And again, it really comes down to how much do you trust in Gabriel Davis, who in his role last year was awesome, and he should have been given the wide receiver 2 spot a lot earlier, I think, last year. But when he finally, did, he looked very good, but that was a small sample size. And I just don't know if I'm willing to sit here and say, yep, that's going to be fantastic. If it is, and he does come in and play as a great wide receiver too, it could be pretty good. But there's that question mark, and sort of during these off-season previews, I kind of have to take into account, okay, how big of a chance do I think this works out? And if it doesn't work out, where are they at? Whereas there's other teams that are just more established. It is worth mentioning that I had them just one spot away from being tier 3. So you hear tier 4 and you're like, oh, that's not great. But again, the team ahead of them, it's like the Falcons, who have Drake London and Kyle Pitts. Like, I would definitely take that over, even if Gabriel Davis works out, I would take Drake London and Kyle Pitts over Gabriel Davis and Stephon Diggs. I would, because I think that that's a better 1-2 combo, and I think that there's a better chance Drake London works out than Gabriel Davis works out. So that's kind of my mindset. I get it. You could flip it. I wouldn't be mad at you. Again, the tiers are supposed to get you in the ballpark, not make it an exact perfect ranking. But, there's a very good chance it could work out. And especially with Josh Allen, it'll probably end up looking better than it is, even if it is really good. Not a disagreement, but you discount the value of the running back position in the draft. Does that change for pass catching / pass blocking running backs? I wonder if receiving backs are drafted too low compared to prototypical running backs. I actually think pass blocking is, to me, one of the most important traits of a running back. It might be the most important trait of a running back. The issue is you don't get that many opportunities to do it, but when you screw one up, it has a much bigger swing in a play than even like 4 or 5 runs in a row would. Just that pass blocking rep, because it can be so important. Because if you're, it's not so much if you're like chipping someone, but if you have to pick up a blitz, I mean, the difference between making that and missing that is how turnovers happen. I mean, huge bad situations can happen if you can't make a block. So that's why I've never been a big believer in going out and drafting guys who are great runners who can't block. To me, I kind of abide by the Billy Beane school of thought in baseball of players tend to be who they are. Yes, you can get better at certain things. Yes, some players do get better. There is a development period there. But you're better off just viewing someone and saying, if they're bad at this, they're probably not going to be good at it once they join our team. So let's get someone who's good at that aspect. I would much rather have someone who could just be fine at every trait than being just a great pure rusher. So pass catching, I honestly don't know. I mean, it's weird because, typically throwing to a running back is always a bad play, but that's just because, typically you can't throw the ball down the field, so you're forced to then take the check down. It's a sort of a, break glass in case of emergency type play, but I would imagine that there's probably more value in that than running the ball on most plays. But again, you have more reps where you run the ball than you do where you run a route. So I would probably say, the way I view it is I want someone who can do all three. That's why I had Dameon Pierce as my running back 1. And finally, you knew a Titans question had to come at some point. I was going to say that the Titans defensive line is far better than you gave them credit for, but then we lost the guy you gave the least credit to, Harold Landry, to an ACL today. That Harold Landry thing sucked. I mean, I wanted to see, we had all these arguments, how good is Harold Landry going to be? I was so excited in seeing like who was going to be right, who's going to be wrong, and just, again, it sucks. I mean, the real thing is it sucks to see someone have to go through an injury because that's just like a huge, like tough mental and physical thing someone has to go through. So that's the main reason. But from the, the fun side of things here, it also sucks for that reason. So yeah, that sucked. But I think that I actually think that the Titans should be okay. I think that they have a defensive line that can withstand an injury there. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of their defensive line. I think that it's largely, a couple good players and a good secondary that makes the other guys look better. But that's just how I view it. And that's what the advanced analytics say. That's what my eye test says. I trust those things over what other people say. But again, I get it because the numbers are, the box score stats are very good. So I do understand the logic behind the, people that think the Titans' defensive line is very good. I can see that as well. So yeah, those are the disagreements. Thank you to everyone who disagreed with me, and it was respectful. I thought that, most of you guys were very, very nice and very respectful there, which is always fun. You didn't even have to be. I don't really care. Part of the fun is us, it's the internet. It's not the place to be nice in the world, but I enjoy it regardless. So yeah, thanks to everyone who asked the questions. I think no more question of the day probably until next offseason. It was a good offseason, sort of thing, but I think we're gonna put a pin in it for now. So, figured I had to get one back though. Thought this would be a fun one. So, again, let me know in the comments below what were your thoughts on my responses to these questions. Always love hearing from you, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.